The letter from the Willowbrook Heights HOA arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before even opening it that my quiet life in suburban Connecticut was about to get complicated. I'm Nathan Rivers, and I'd been living in my modest three-bedroom house on Maple Drive for about 18 months when the trouble started. The envelope had that official letterhead that always makes your stomach drop, the kind with serif fonts and fake gold embossing that's supposed to make you take it seriously. I set down my coffee and tore it open, scanning the contents while standing in my kitchen. "Dear Mr. Rivers," it began, "it has come to the attention of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association Board that you have installed an unauthorized backup generator on your property without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Per Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, all external modifications, installations, or additions must receive written approval before implementation. You are hereby required to remove said generator within 14 days or face daily fines of $250 until compliance is achieved." I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. The generator they were talking about was a fairly substantial natural gas unit I'd installed 6 months ago, right after moving to Connecticut. It wasn't some cheap portable thing. I'd paid nearly $15,000 for the installation, including all the proper permits from the town. The unit sat on a concrete pad behind my house, partially screened by landscaping I'd specifically planted to minimize its visual impact. What the letter didn't mention, and what the HOA had no idea about, was why that generator was so critical. But I was about to find out just how complicated that explanation would become. I grabbed my phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a voice that could freeze water. "Willowbrook Heights HOA, this is Patricia speaking." "Hi, Patricia. This is Nathan Rivers on Maple Drive. I just received a letter about my backup generator and I need to speak with someone about it immediately." "Mr. Rivers, yes." Papers rustled in the background. "Your violation was reported by our president, Linda Fairchild, during her monthly neighborhood inspection. The letter outlines your options quite clearly." "I need to explain why that generator can't be removed," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's not just for my house. It serves a critical function for the hospital 2 blocks away." There was a pause. "Mr. Rivers, we have very clear guidelines about external installations. If you needed a generator, you should have submitted the proper paperwork before installation." "I wasn't living here when it was installed," I said. "I bought the house with it already in place. The previous owner had it put in." "That's irrelevant to current compliance," Patricia said with the efficiency of someone who delivered bad news 1,000 times. "The 14-day timeline begins from the date on the letter, which was yesterday. I suggest you schedule a removal as soon as possible." "Can I at least meet with the board to explain the situation?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Fairchild is very particular about the aesthetic standards of our community, but I suppose I could arrange a meeting. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock at the community center. Don't be late." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, my coffee going cold on the counter. This was going to be a disaster, I could feel it. But I had no choice. I needed to make them understand what they were asking me to do. That evening, I drove the short distance to Mercy General Hospital, the regional medical center that sat just beyond the border of our HOA community. The building was a sprawling complex of brick and glass, 6 stories tall with 2 newer wings that had been added in the past decade. I'd made this drive dozens of times since moving here, though never under these circumstances. I parked in the visitor lot and made my way to the administrative offices on the 2nd floor, The receptionist recognized me and waved me through immediately. "Nathan, go right in. Dr. Morrison is expecting you." Gerald Morrison was the hospital administrator, a silver-haired man in his early 60s who'd been running Mercy General for the past 15 years. His office was modest despite his position, filled with family photos and commendations from various medical organizations. He stood when I entered, concern already etched on his face. "I got your text," he said, gesturing to a chair. "They want you to remove the generator." I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his frown deepening with each line. "This is bad, Nathan. Really bad. I know. I'm meeting with the HOA board tomorrow night. I need you to help me explain why that generator is so critical." Gerald set the letter down and leaned back in his chair. "Let me make sure I have this right for my own records. Your generator, the one installed by the previous homeowner, Michael Chen, is tied into our relay system for the surgical wing. Is that correct?" "Exactly. When Michael sold me the house, he explained the whole setup. He was an electrical engineer who'd worked with the hospital to create a backup system for the backup system. Your main emergency generators handle most of the hospital, but the relay that runs from my property provides supplementary power to specific circuits in the surgical wing, particularly the 3 operating rooms on the 4th floor." "Right," Gerald said, pulling up something on his computer. "Michael designed it after that incident 8 years ago when we had a main generator fail during a surgery. The patient survived, but it was close. Too close. He approached us with this solution, paid for most of it himself, and we've maintained it ever since. It's not required by code, but it's saved us twice in the past 5 years during power outages." "So what happens if I have to remove it?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Technically, we still have our main backup systems. We wouldn't be in violation of any regulations. But those 3 operating rooms would lose their redundant power supply. If we have another catastrophic failure like we did 8 years ago, we'd be back to the same risk level. It's not about day-to-day operations. It's about worst-case scenarios. Can you come to the meeting tomorrow?" "Help me explain this." "Absolutely. This is too important. I'll bring our chief of surgery, Dr. Reeves, as well. She can speak to the medical implications better than I can." I left the hospital feeling slightly better but still anxious. HOAs were notorious for being inflexible, and I had a feeling this Linda Fairchild wasn't going to be swayed by logic or reason. The next evening, I arrived at the Willowbrook Heights Community Center 15 minutes early. The building was a converted barn that had been renovated with HOA dues, complete with a large meeting room, a kitchen, and a small gym. I'd been here once before for a neighborhood mixer that I'd left after 20 uncomfortable minutes. Gerald and Dr. Sarah Reeves arrived shortly after me. Sarah was in her early 40s, a respected surgeon with a no-nonsense demeanor that came from years of making life or death decisions. She wore scrubs under her jacket, having come directly from the hospital. "Thanks for coming," I said as we gathered in the lobby. "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied. "If some HOA board thinks they can compromise patient safety over aesthetics, they need to hear exactly what that means." The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front and rows of chairs facing it. A handful of other residents had filtered in, probably here for other issues on the agenda. At exactly 7 o'clock, the board members took their seats at the front table. Linda Fairchild sat in the center. She was exactly what I'd expected. A woman in her mid-50s with an immaculate blonde bob, designer glasses, and an expression that suggested she'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by strict rule enforcement. She wore a blazer with the HOA logo embroidered on the pocket. To her left was Thomas Garrett, the vice president, a balding man in his 60s who looked profoundly uncomfortable. On her right sat Janet Wu, the treasurer, who was studying some papers with intense focus. Two other board members whose names I didn't know rounded out the group. "Good evening, everyone," Linda began, her voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. "We have several items on tonight's agenda. First up is a discussion regarding the unauthorized generator installation at 247 Maple Drive, owned by Mr. Nathan Rivers. Mr. Rivers, please come forward." I stood and walked to the front, Gerald and Sarah following me. Linda's eyebrows rose when she saw them. "Mr. Rivers, this is a community meeting. Outside parties require prior approval to attend. Mrs. Fairchild, these are representatives from Mercy General Hospital. They're here to provide critical information about why my generator cannot be removed." "The letter was quite clear," Linda said, her tone sharpening. "The installation was never approved by this board. The Aesthetics Committee has deemed it an eyesore that negatively impacts property values. Removal is non-negotiable." "If I may," Gerald interjected smoothly, "I'm Gerald Morrison, hospital administrator at Mercy General. I understand your concerns about community standards, but Mr. Rivers' generator serves a function beyond his personal property. It's integrated into our hospital's emergency power system." Linda's expression didn't change. "That's not relevant to HOA guidelines, Mr. Morrison. Our responsibility is to this community and its property values, not to accommodate external entities, even if those external entities are saving lives." Sarah stepped forward, her voice level but intense. "I'm Dr. Sarah Reeves, Chief of Surgery at Mercy General. That generator provides redundant backup power to 3 operating rooms. If we experience a main generator failure during surgery, that system could mean the difference between a patient living or dying." For the first time, Linda's certainty wavered slightly. Thomas leaned over and whispered something to her. She listened, then shook her head. "I sympathize with your situation, Dr. Reeves, but the hospital's infrastructure needs are not the responsibility of this HOA. If you require additional backup power, that should be installed on hospital property, not in a residential neighborhood." "The technical requirements make that impossible," Gerald said. "The relay system was designed by an electrical engineer specifically to provide coverage from that location. Relocating it would require redesigning the entire system at a cost of over $500,000. "Again, not our concern," Linda replied. "Mr. Rivers purchased that property knowing it was part of an HOA community. He's bound by our rules like everyone else." I'd been quiet up to this point, letting Gerald and Sarah make the technical arguments, but I could see this wasn't working. Linda Fairchild didn't care about hospital operations or patient safety. She cared about control and compliance. "Mrs. Fairchild," I said, "when I bought this house, the generator was already installed. I was told it was grandfathered in because it existed before the current HOA bylaws were updated." "That information is incorrect," Linda said crisply. "I've reviewed our records personally. The previous owner, Mr. Chen, was sent multiple notices about the generator. He ignored them all. When he sold the property, that violation transferred to you. No one mentioned any violation during the sale," I protested. "That's a matter between you and your real estate attorney, Mr. Rivers. It doesn't change your current obligation to comply." Thomas cleared his throat. "Linda, perhaps we could grant a variance in this case, given the circumstances." Linda's head snapped toward him. "A variance sets a precedent, Thomas. If we allow this, we'll have solar panels, satellite dishes, and who knows what else cluttering our community. Standards exist for a reason, Standards shouldn't trump common sense, I said, my frustration finally breaking through. You're talking about potentially putting surgical patients at risk because you don't like how a generator looks, even though it's mostly hidden by landscaping. I'm talking about maintaining the character and value of this community, Linda shot back. Something you clearly don't appreciate. The generator is an industrial-looking monstrosity that violates multiple aesthetic guidelines. It must be removed. This discussion is over. We're not done, Sarah said, her voice taking on a steel edge I imagined she used in the operating room. Mrs. Fairchild, I want you to understand something very clearly. If that generator is removed and we subsequently have a power failure that results in patient harm, I will personally ensure that this HOA board is named in any resulting lawsuit. I'll testify that you were informed of the medical necessity and chose to prioritize appearances over lives. The room went silent. Linda's face flushed red. Are you threatening this board, Dr. Reeves? I'm informing you of the consequences of your decision. There's a difference. Linda stood abruptly. This meeting is concluded regarding this matter. Mr. Rivers, you have 12 days remaining to comply. If the generator is not removed, fines will begin accruing. Good evening. She gathered her papers and walked out, leaving the rest of the board looking uncomfortable. Thomas approached us as the room began to clear. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Linda is very particular about the rules, but I'll try to talk to her, see if we can find some middle ground. I appreciate that, Gerald said, but I need you to understand how serious this is. That generator has already saved lives. Removing it puts people at risk. Thomas nodded unhappily and followed Linda out. Well, that went poorly, I muttered as we walked to the parking lot. She's going to be a problem, Sarah said. I've dealt with administrators like her before. Logic doesn't work because this isn't about logic. It's about power and control. So what do? I asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow I'm going to contact our hospital attorney. We need to explore our legal options. In the meantime, don't remove that generator under any circumstances. The fines start in 12 days, I pointed out. At $250 per day, that adds up fast. The hospital will cover them, Gerald said firmly. This is our problem as much as yours. That generator was installed to serve our needs. We're not going to let you take the financial hit for it. I drove home that night feeling like I'd stepped into quicksand. What should have been a simple explanation had turned into a battle with someone who seemed to view any challenge to her authority as a personal affront. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. I received another letter from the HOA, this one threatening legal action if I didn't comply. The hospital's attorney sent a response explaining the medical necessity and requesting a formal variance hearing. Linda Fairchild rejected the request outright. Then, on day 13, the fines officially started. I came home from work to find a certified letter taped to my door. Inside was a bill for $250, along with a notice that the fine would continue daily until the generator was removed. True to his word, Gerald had the hospital cut me a check to cover it. But we all knew this couldn't continue indefinitely. This is insane, I told Gerald over the phone that evening. She's not going to back down, is she? No, Gerald admitted. She's not, but neither are we. Our attorney is preparing a lawsuit. We're going to argue that the HOA is creating a public safety hazard by forcing removal of critical medical infrastructure. How long will that take? Months, probably. Maybe longer. These things move slowly. I rubbed my eyes, exhausted. What if there's a power failure before then? What if someone gets hurt? Then we document everything and make sure everyone knows the HOA was warned. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was the only one he had. 2 weeks into the fines, something happened that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. Sarah Reeves' name flashed on the screen and I answered immediately. "Nathan, we have a situation. Can you come to the hospital right now?" "What happened?" "Just come. Fourth floor, surgical wing." I left work early and drove to Mercy General, my mind racing through possibilities. When I reached the fourth floor, I found Sarah standing outside operating room 2 with Gerald and several other staff members. They looked shaken. "We just had a close call," Sarah said without preamble. "We were 40 minutes into a cardiac bypass when we lost main power. The primary backup kicked in immediately, but there was a voltage fluctuation that caused a brief drop. Your generator, the relay system, it smoothed out the power to this room and kept everything stable. If it hadn't been there, we would have had maybe 5 seconds of unstable power to the bypass machine. That could have killed the patient." I felt my stomach drop. "Is the patient okay?" "Yes, but barely. We're stable now, main power is back." "But Nathan, if that generator had been removed like the HOA is demanding, I don't know if we could have saved him. The timing was that close." Gerald pulled out his phone. "I'm documenting everything. We're going to need this for our case." "Sarah, I need you to write up a detailed incident report, medical terminology and all. We need to make it crystal clear what would have happened without that relay system." "Already on it," Sarah said. "There's something else," Gerald added, looking at me. "I called an emergency press conference for tomorrow morning. This needs to go public. The community needs to know what their HOA is doing." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked. "It'll make Linda even more hostile." "I don't care," Gerald said flatly. "We almost lost a patient today because of a power fluctuation. If that generator gets removed and something worse happens, I'm not going to be able to live with myself knowing we could have prevented it. The public pressure might be the only thing that forces the HOA to back down." The press conference the next morning was held in the hospital's main lobby. Local news stations showed up, along with reporters from the Hartford Courant and several online outlets. Gerald and Sarah explained the situation clearly and professionally, detailing the incident from the previous day without revealing any patient information that would violate privacy laws. "This backup relay system has been in place for 5 years," Gerald told the assembled media. "It was installed as an additional safety measure after a previous generator failure nearly resulted in tragedy. Yesterday, it proved its worth by preventing what could have been a fatal incident during open-heart surgery. Now, the Willowbrook Heights HOA is demanding its removal because they believe it's an aesthetic violation. We're here today to ask the community and local officials to help us find a solution that prioritizes patient safety over appearance standards." The questions came fast. How many patients had benefited from the system? What would happen if it was removed? Had the HOA been informed of the medical necessity? Sarah fielded the medical questions with her usual precision. "In the 5 years this system has been active, it has prevented 2 potentially catastrophic power failures, and yesterday's incident makes 3. Every surgery we perform in those 3 operating rooms benefits from having that additional layer of protection. Removing it would be like removing airbags from a car because someone doesn't like how they look." By that afternoon, the story had exploded across local news and social media. The narrative was simple and compelling. HOA demands removal of life-saving medical equipment over aesthetic concerns. Public opinion swung heavily against Linda Fairchild and the Willowbrook Heights Board. I started getting calls from neighbors I'd barely spoken to. Most were supportive, expressing shock that the HOA was being so inflexible. A few were angry that I'd made the neighborhood look bad by going public. Linda Fairchild, predictably, was furious. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday morning, mandatory attendance for all homeowners. The community center was packed when I arrived. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. Local news cameras were set up in the back, having been tipped off about the meeting. Linda stood at the front table, her expression rigid with barely controlled anger. The other board members looked decidedly uncomfortable, and I noticed Thomas Garrett kept glancing at the news cameras with obvious concern. This meeting is being called to address the recent media spectacle created by one of our residents, Linda began, her voice tight. Mr. Nathan Rivers has chosen to ignore HOA regulations and has enlisted outside parties to harass this board and damage the reputation of our community. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "We saw the news. The hospital says people could die." Linda's jaw clenched. The hospital is being dramatic to serve their own interests. This is about maintaining community standards that protect everyone's property values. Mr. Rivers knew the rules when he bought his property. Actually, I didn't, I said, standing up. The generator was already installed. I was told it was legal. And even if I had known, I would have bought the house anyway because that generator serves an important purpose that goes beyond property aesthetics. Rules are rules, Mr. Rivers. You don't get to pick and choose which ones apply to you. Even when following those rules might cost someone their life. Sarah Reeves stood up from where she'd been sitting in the middle of the crowd. Because that's what we're talking about here, Mrs. Fairchild. Yesterday, that generator kept my patient alive during a power fluctuation. Next time, it might be your life or the life of someone you love on that operating table. That's manipulative and inappropriate, Linda snapped. This board will not be bullied by emotional appeals. Thomas finally spoke up. Linda, perhaps we should reconsider our position given the new information. No, Linda said sharply. We will not set a precedent of caving to public pressure and media manipulation. The generator violates our bylaws. It must be removed. This discussion is closed. Then I'm calling for a vote of no confidence, Thomas said, his voice shaking slightly. The board needs to reconsider this decision, and if you won't allow it, then we need new leadership. The room erupted. Half the residents started talking at once, some supporting Thomas, others defending Linda. The news cameras captured everything. Linda's face had gone from red to white. You can't do that in an open meeting, Thomas. There are procedures. I'm aware of the procedures, Thomas said, finding his footing. I'm following them. As vice president, I have the right to call for a vote of no confidence in the president's leadership. We can hold the vote at our next board meeting. This is ridiculous, Linda said. I've served this community for 6 years. I've maintained our standards, increased property values, and enforced the rules fairly and consistently. You've also created a public relations nightmare, Janet Wu said quietly, speaking for the first time. My phone has been ringing off the hook with residents concerned about the news coverage. Linda, I think Thomas is right. We need to reconsider. Linda gathered her papers with shaking hands. Fine. The board will meet privately next week to discuss this matter further. This meeting is adjourned. She walked out to a chorus of mixed reactions, some residents booing, others applauding. The news cameras got it all. That evening I sat on my back deck, looking at the generator that had caused so much trouble. It hummed quietly, doing its job, completely unaware of the chaos swirling around it. My phone had been buzzing all day with messages of support from neighbors and strangers who'd seen the news coverage. Gerald called around 8 o'clock. Did you see the evening news? No, I've been avoiding it. You should watch. Channel 8 did a whole segment on HOA overreach, using your situation as the centerpiece. They interviewed several legal experts who say the HOA is on very shaky ground, especially now that there's documented evidence of the generator preventing patient harm. What happens now? We wait for the board meeting next week. If Linda is removed, maybe the new leadership will be more reasonable. If not, our lawsuit moves forward. Either way, you're not removing that generator. The week crawled by. The news coverage continued, with op-eds appearing in local papers about HOA power and the need for common-sense exceptions to rigid rules. A state representative even issued a statement saying she was looking into legislation that would prevent HOAs from interfering with medical infrastructure. Linda Fairchild gave one interview to a conservative property rights blog where she doubled down on her position. Homeowners associations exist to protect property values and maintain community standards. If we allow exceptions every time someone claims their rule violation serves a higher purpose, the entire system breaks down. Mr. Rivers and the hospital are asking us to prioritize their convenience over the rights of every other homeowner in our community. The response online was brutal. Comment sections filled with people calling her heartless and pointing out that patient safety wasn't about convenience. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. This time, even more residents showed up, along with a larger media presence. The hospital sent not just Gerald and Sarah, but also their chief legal counsel and 2 more surgeons who worked in the affected operating rooms. The meeting opened with Thomas officially calling for the vote of no confidence. The procedure required a written ballot from each of the 5 board members. Linda tried to argue that the vote should be postponed, but the HOA bylaws were clear. Once called, the vote had to be held at the next scheduled board meeting. The ballots were distributed, filled out, and collected by Patricia, the HOA administrator who'd answered my first phone call. She counted them in front of everyone, her expression carefully neutral. 4 votes in favor of no confidence, she announced. 1 vote against. Linda Fairchild is removed as president of the Willowbrook Heights HOA board, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Linda sat frozen for a moment, then stood and walked out without a word, her spine rigid with humiliation and anger. Thomas was voted in as interim president. His first act was to call for a discussion about my generator. Given the documented medical necessity and the potential public safety implications, he said, I'm proposing we grant a permanent variance for the generator at 247 Maple Drive. The variance would be conditional on the generator being maintained in good working order and the landscaping screening being preserved. I second that motion, Janet Wu said immediately. The vote was unanimous among the remaining 4 board members. I felt a wave of relief so strong I nearly sagged in my chair. It was over. After weeks of stress, fines, media coverage, and uncertainty, it was actually over. Mr. Rivers, Thomas said, looking at me, I apologize for the hardship this situation has caused you. The board will refund all fines paid to date. We'll also be reviewing our variance procedures to ensure we have a process in place for situations like this where rigid rule enforcement conflicts with legitimate safety concerns. Gerald stood and addressed the board. On behalf of Mercy General Hospital, I want to thank you for making the right decision. We're committed to maintaining that generator and the relay system to the highest standards. If there's anything we can do to address community concerns about its appearance or operation, we're happy to work with you. The meeting concluded with a much different atmosphere than the previous one. Residents came up to congratulate Thomas on his courage in standing up to Linda, and several people stopped to shake my hand or tell me they were glad the situation had been resolved. But as I walked to my car, I saw Linda Fairchild standing in the parking lot, talking urgently on her phone. She glanced at me, and the look she gave me was pure venom. Something about her expression made my relief evaporate. This wasn't over. Not for her. The next morning, I woke up to find my generator had been vandalized. Someone had spray painted obscenities across it, cut the fuel line, and smashed the control panel with what looked like a hammer. The damage was extensive enough that the unit wouldn't operate without significant repairs. I called the police immediately, then Gerald. Officers arrived within 20 minutes, took photos, and filed a report. The responding officer, a young woman named Officer Martinez, surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "I have a suspicion," I said carefully, "but I can't prove anything." "This is related to that HOA dispute I saw on the news." "Probably." She made notes. "We'll check for surveillance cameras in the neighborhood, see if we caught anything. In the meantime, you should document everything and report it to your insurance company." Gerald arrived as the police were finishing up. He looked at the damage and swore quietly. "How long to fix it?" I asked. "I'll have our facilities manager look at it, but probably a week, maybe more depending on parts. The control panel is custom designed for integration with our relay system." "What about the operating rooms?" "We'll shut them down for any major surgeries until the relay is back online. We can still use them for minor procedures, but anything high risk gets moved to other operating rooms with standard backup only." "So Linda wins after all," I said bitterly. "Not if I can help it." Gerald pulled out his phone and made a call. "Patricia, this is Gerald Morrison. I need security footage from the Willowbrook Heights Community Center parking lot from last night. Yes, the whole night. I'll explain when I get there." He hung up and looked at me. "The community center has cameras covering the parking lot. If Linda or anyone else came back here last night after the meeting, there might be footage of their vehicle." We drove to the community center together. Patricia met us at the door, looking concerned. "Dr. Morrison, what's this about?" "Nathan's generator was vandalized last night. Thousands of dollars in damage. The police are investigating, but we're hoping your parking lot cameras might have caught something." Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, come with me." She led us to a small office where the security system was set up. The cameras were basic but functional, with footage stored digitally for 30 days. She pulled up the previous night's recordings and we started scanning through them. Most of the footage was boring. Board members leaving after the meeting, residents trickling out, the parking lot going dark. Then, around 1 in the morning, a car pulled into the lot. It sat there for about 5 minutes before driving away. The angle wasn't great, but we could make out the license plate. "Can you zoom in on that?" I asked. Patricia enhanced the image as much as the system allowed. The plate was clearly visible. "That's Linda's car," Patricia said quietly. "I recognize it from the plates. She has a custom plate with her initials." Gerald pulled out his phone and took photos of the screen. "Patricia, I need you to preserve this footage and make copies. This is evidence in a criminal investigation." Patricia nodded, looking sick. "I can't believe she would do something like this. I mean, I know she was angry, but this is vandalism. This is criminal." Officer Martinez was very interested in the footage when we brought it to her attention. She requested the files officially and expanded the investigation. By late afternoon, a detective called me to ask additional questions. "Mr. Rivers, I'm Detective Frank Carson. I've been assigned to your vandalism case. The video footage is compelling, but it's not definitive. We can see Mrs. Fairchild's vehicle in the parking lot around the time the vandalism likely occurred. but we can't see anyone actually damaging your property. I'd like to bring her in for questioning, but I wanted to give you a heads up first." "What happens if she did it?" I asked. "Criminal mischief, possibly criminal tampering since this involves medical equipment. Depending on the dollar amount of damage, it could be a felony. But I need to warn you, these cases can be tricky." Even with the video, a good defense attorney might argue she was just sitting in the parking lot and someone else did the actual vandalism. "What do you need from me?" "Get me a full damage estimate. Document everything, and be prepared for this to get messy. If Mrs. Fairchild is charged, she's going to fight back hard." The estimate from the repair company came in at $8,000. The custom control panel alone was $4,000, plus labor and the damaged fuel line components. I forwarded everything to Detective Carson and my insurance company. Linda Fairchild was brought in for questioning 2 days later. I wasn't present, but Gerald had contacts in the police department who gave him updates. Apparently, Linda denied everything. She claimed she'd been sitting in the parking lot after the meeting because she was too upset to drive home immediately. She said she'd never left her car and had no idea about the vandalism. "It's a decent cover story," Detective Carson told me over the phone. But here's the problem for her. We pulled her phone records with a warrant. At 1:15 in the morning, her phone pinged off a cell tower that's closest to your house, not the community center. She left the parking lot and drove toward your neighborhood. "That proves she was in the area," I said. "It's circumstantial, but combined with the video and the timing, it's building a case. We're also checking hardware stores in the area to see if anyone remembers selling spray paint or tools to someone matching her description. It's a long shot, but sometimes we get lucky." We got lucky. A hardware store 3 miles away had footage of Linda buying black spray paint and a hammer at 9 o'clock the previous evening, hours before the meeting. The timestamp on her credit card receipt confirmed the purchase. When confronted with this evidence, Linda's attorney advised her to stop talking to police. Detective Carson called me with an update. "We're charging her with criminal mischief in the 2nd degree and criminal tampering. The second charge is because the generator is part of medical infrastructure. That makes it more serious. She'll be arraigned next week." "What's the likely outcome?" "Hard to say. First offense, she'll probably get a plea deal. Community service, restitution, maybe probation. But she'll have a criminal record and that's going to hurt, especially if civil suits follow." The news coverage erupted again. Former HOA president charged with vandalizing medical generator ran on every local outlet. The story had everything: community conflict, a sympathetic victim, and now actual criminal charges. Linda Fairchild went from being a controversial figure to a villain in the public eye. The hospital's public relations director issued a statement expressing disappointment that the situation had escalated to criminal behavior and reaffirming the importance of the generator to patient safety. They announced the relay system would be back online within a week thanks to expedited repairs. I was exhausted by the attention. My phone rang constantly with interview requests that I declined. I just wanted my quiet life back, to go to work and come home without dealing with legal drama or media circuses. But there was one more twist coming. Thomas called me on a Sunday afternoon, 3 days before Linda's arraignment. "Nathan, I need to talk to you about something sensitive. Can you come by my house?" Thomas lived 4 streets over from me in a larger colonial-style home. He met me at the door looking troubled and led me to his home office. "I've been going through HOA records more thoroughly since taking over as president," he said, settling into his desk chair. I wanted to understand the full history of the generator situation, make sure we had everything documented properly. Okay, I said, sensing there was more. I found something disturbing. Linda didn't just fail to approve the generator, she actively concealed information about it. When Michael Chen initially installed it, he submitted all the proper paperwork to the board. He explained the medical purpose, got letters of support from the hospital, even offered to increase his HOA dues to cover any perceived impact. The board at the time, which Linda was part of but not yet president of, actually approved it with conditions. I stared at him. What conditions? Landscaping to screen it, annual inspections, and that it be disclosed in any future property sales. Michael complied with all of it. But when Linda became president 2 years ago, she went through the records and simply removed the approval documentation. She made it look like the generator had never been properly approved, so she could go after Michael for a violation. Why would she do that? Thomas pulled out a file folder and opened it. This is speculation based on what I've found, but I think Linda had personal issues with Michael. There are emails in here where Michael challenged some of her other decisions, questioned her expenditures of HOA funds, even suggested at one meeting that she was being too aggressive in enforcement. Linda doesn't handle challenges to her authority well, as you've seen. So she falsified HOA records to punish him. It looks that way. And when he sold the house to you, she saw it as another opportunity to enforce a violation that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Can you prove all this? The digital trail is pretty clear. I've already forwarded everything to the hospital's attorney for your lawsuit. But Nathan, this is probably criminal. She didn't just vandalize your generator. She manipulated official HOA documents. That might be fraud or forgery. I'm not sure of the exact charges. I called Detective Carson immediately. He agreed to meet with Thomas and review the documentation. Within a week, additional charges were filed against Linda Fairchild, tampering with public records and fraud. The legal definition of public records was slightly gray when it came to HOA documents, but the prosecutor argued that HOA records affected property values and were legally filed documents, making them a form of public record. Linda's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, but the judge allowed them to proceed. The case was building into something much larger than a simple vandalism incident. The arraignment became a media event. Linda showed up in a conservative suit, her expression stoic, flanked by her attorney. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. The judge set a trial date for 3 months out and set bail at $10,000, which Linda posted immediately. Outside the courthouse, her attorney made a statement. Mrs. Fairchild is innocent of these charges. She's being scapegoated because she dared to enforce rules that everyone else in the community agreed to. The HOA board turned on her to avoid bad publicity, and now the prosecutor is piling on charges to justify their actions. We look forward to proving her innocence at trial. But the evidence was overwhelming. As the trial approached, Linda's attorney began negotiating a plea deal. The prosecutor was willing to drop the tampering and fraud charges in exchange for a guilty plea on the criminal mischief charge, along with restitution, community service, and 2 years of probation. Linda's attorney pushed back, trying to get the criminal charge reduced to a violation, but the prosecutor held firm. The vandalism had caused significant damage to medical equipment. There would be a criminal conviction. 2 weeks before the scheduled trial, Linda accepted the plea deal. The sentencing hearing was brief. Linda stood before the judge and formally pleaded guilty to criminal mischief in the 2nd degree. The judge sentenced her to 200 hours of community service, full restitution for the damage to my generator, and 2 years of probation. Additionally, the judge ordered her to have no contact with me or any hospital personnel. "Mrs. Fairchild," the judge said, "I've reviewed the evidence in this case, and I'm deeply troubled by your actions. You held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust by falsifying records, and then engaging in criminal behavior when things didn't go your way. The fact that your actions potentially endangered patients at a hospital makes this even more serious. I hope you use this probation period to reflect on your choices and develop better judgment. If you violate probation or engage in any further criminal behavior, you'll be facing jail time. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Linda said quietly. It was the first time I'd seen her look truly defeated. The civil lawsuit that the hospital had filed moved forward separately. With Linda's criminal conviction as evidence, her homeowner's insurance company settled quickly, covering not just the repair costs I'd already incurred but additional damages for the stress and harassment. The HOA's insurance also settled a claim for their role in the initial violation notices, though Thomas had worked hard to demonstrate that the current board leadership was not responsible for Linda's actions. Life gradually returned to normal. The generator was repaired and functioning perfectly. Thomas proved to be a reasonable and fair HOA president, and the board revised their variance procedures to include provisions for situations involving public safety or medical necessity. I got to know some of my neighbors better through all of this. Several became friends, people who'd supported me throughout the conflict and appreciated that I'd stood my ground. The neighborhood felt more like a community than it had before. 6 months after the sentencing, I was doing yard work on a Saturday morning when Gerald stopped by. He'd made a habit of checking in every few weeks, partially for friendship and partially to maintain the relationship between the hospital and the community. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against his car. "Sure, what's up?" "I wanted to thank you again for everything you went through. And I wanted you to know that we're implementing a new program at the hospital. We're creating a community liaison position specifically to manage relationships with nearby neighborhoods, make sure situations like this never happen again. We should have been more proactive in maintaining documentation and communication about the relay system." "That's a good idea," I said. "There's something else. The patient whose surgery was saved by the generator during that power fluctuation. His name is Richard Norton. He's made a full recovery, and he wanted me to give you this." Gerald handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Mr. Rivers, I'll never forget the kindness of a stranger who fought to keep equipment in place that saved my life. The doctors told me that without the relay system from your generator, I might not have survived the surgery. Thank you for standing your ground and refusing to give in to unreasonable demands. You're a hero, even if you don't think of yourself that way. With gratitude, Richard Norton." I read the letter twice, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. In all the chaos and stress and legal battles, I'd sometimes lost sight of why it mattered. This letter brought it all back into focus. "Tell Mr. Norton I said thank you," I told Gerald, "and that I'm glad he's doing well." "I will. He actually wants to meet you sometime if you're willing." "I'd like that." Gerald left, and I went back to my yard work, thinking about how strange life could be. A year ago, I'd moved to Connecticut looking for a quiet place to build a life. Instead, I'd gotten a community battle, media attention, criminal charges against a former HOA president, and a letter from a man whose life had been saved by a piece of equipment sitting in my backyard. The generator hummed along quietly, doing what it was designed to do, keeping the relay system active and ready for the next time it would be needed. Looking at it now, I didn't see an eyesore or a violation of aesthetic standards. I saw a connection between my property and the hospital down the street, a literal lifeline that had proven its worth multiple times over. Thomas and the new HOA board eventually put up a small plaque at the community center, commemorating the generator situation and the lessons learned about balancing rules with common sense. It read, "In recognition that community standards must sometimes bend to serve the greater good, and that the safety of our neighbors, both near and far, matters more than appearances." Linda Fairchild completed her community service and paid her restitution. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved away, unable to face the daily reminder of her fall from power. Some people felt bad for her, thought the punishment was too harsh. I didn't. She'd had multiple chances to do the right thing and had chosen spite and control instead. On a practical level, the generator became something of a neighborhood curiosity. School groups from the local elementary school would sometimes visit to learn about emergency medical systems, with the hospital and HOA board collaborating on educational presentations. My backyard became an unlikely classroom for teaching kids about infrastructure, community responsibility, and how individual actions could have far-reaching consequences. I met Richard Norton at a coffee shop in town about 3 months after receiving his letter. He was in his late 60s, a retired teacher with grandkids he couldn't stop talking about. We spent 2 hours talking about everything from his surgery to his career to his plans for retirement now that he had a second chance at it. "You know what the funny thing is?" Richard said as we were wrapping up. "I used to complain about my HOA too. Different neighborhood, different issues, but same kind of petty nonsense. After what I went through, after learning what you dealt with, I look at it all differently now. Life's too short to worry about whether someone's mailbox is the wrong shade of brown or their grass is a 1/4 inch too long." "That's a good perspective to have," I said. "It's the only perspective that makes sense. Rules matter, but people matter more. I wish more folks understood that." We stayed in touch after that, meeting for coffee every month or so. Richard became a friend, someone whose presence in my life was a constant reminder that the fight had been worth it. A year after the initial HOA letter, I was sitting on my back deck on a warm summer evening, grilling dinner and enjoying the peace. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Rivers, this is Dr. Sarah Reeves from Mercy General." "Hi, Dr. Reeves. Is everything okay?" "More than okay. I wanted to let you know that we just used your generator relay system again tonight. We had a lightning strike take out some of our primary systems during a surgery. The relay kicked in flawlessly and kept everything stable. Another life saved, Nathan. I wanted you to know." After we hung up, I walked over to the generator and just stood there for a moment. It had become more than a machine to me. It was a symbol of standing up for what mattered, of refusing to back down when the easy path was to comply and avoid conflict. The next HOA board meeting, I actually attended voluntarily for the first time since the whole mess had been resolved. Thomas was surprised to see me. "Nathan. Good to see you. Nothing's wrong, is there?" "No, everything's fine. I just wanted to be more involved in the community. Figure if I'm going to live here, I should participate." "That's great. We'd love to have your input." The meeting was routine, covering standard items like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. But at the end, Thomas added something new. "I want to remind everyone that our new variance request process is available on the HOA website. We've had 3 requests submitted so far, all approved. We're trying to be more flexible and reasonable while still maintaining community standards. If anyone has concerns or questions, please reach out." After the meeting, several residents came up to talk to me. Some thanked me for fighting the good fight. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner when Linda was causing problems. A few just wanted to hear the story firsthand. "I think you changed this neighborhood for the better," one older woman named Margaret told me. Linda had everyone afraid to do anything without permission. She made this place feel oppressive. Now it feels like an actual community again. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "Thomas and the others on the board deserve credit too. Maybe, but you were the one willing to fight when it mattered." That takes courage. Life continued to settle into a comfortable rhythm. My job was going well. I'd made genuine friends in the neighborhood. The hospital drama had faded into an interesting story I could tell at parties. The generator just kept doing its job, quietly and efficiently. Then, about 18 months after the initial HOA letter, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a state representative's office. "Mr. Rivers, this is Jamie Chen. I work for Representative Laura Freeman. The representative has been following your case and would like to discuss it with you." "Discuss what exactly?" "She's proposing legislation that would protect medical infrastructure from HOA interference. She'd like to use your situation as a case study and get your input on the bill's language." A week later, I sat in Representative Freeman's office in Hartford, along with Gerald, Sarah, and several other hospital administrators from across the state. The representative was a sharp woman in her 40s who'd clearly done her homework. "Gentlemen, doctors, thank you for coming. Mr. Rivers, your case highlighted a gap in our state law. Currently, HOAs have broad authority to regulate property appearance and use, but there's no explicit protection for infrastructure that serves critical public interests like emergency medical systems. I want to change that." She outlined a bill that would prevent HOAs from interfering with medical equipment or infrastructure that had been properly permitted and served a documented public safety function. It included provisions for reasonable aesthetic accommodations, but made clear that HOAs couldn't simply ban such equipment because they didn't like how it looked. "Will this actually pass?" I asked. "I think it has a good chance. Your case got a lot of attention, and I've had inquiries from constituents about similar situations. Not just generators, but also things like communications equipment for volunteer fire departments, emergency warning systems, things like that. There's appetite for common sense reform." The bill was introduced in the state legislature 3 months later. It passed the House with strong bipartisan support and moved to the Senate. I was asked to testify at a committee hearing, which was simultaneously terrifying and empowering. Standing in the state capitol, telling my story to legislators who actually seemed to care, felt surreal. I talked about the initial violation notice, the hospital's concerns, Linda's vandalism, and the ultimate resolution. I made it clear that I wasn't against HOAs in principle, but that there needed to be reasonable limits on their authority when public safety was involved. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining communities, I told the committee. But they shouldn't have the power to endanger lives over aesthetic preferences. My generator looks like exactly what it is, a piece of emergency equipment. But it's partially screened, it's well maintained, and most importantly, it has saved lives. No HOA should be able to order its removal under those circumstances. The bill passed the Senate and was signed into law by the governor in a ceremony that I attended along with Gerald, Sarah, and several others who'd been involved in the case. The governor specifically mentioned my situation in her remarks. "This law ensures that when we have a conflict between appearance and safety, safety wins," she said. "It's common sense, but sometimes common sense needs to be written into law." Thank you to Nathan Rivers and everyone at Mercy General Hospital for bringing this issue to light. The law's passage felt like the final chapter in the whole saga. What had started as a frustrating HOA dispute had turned into actual legislative change that would protect others in similar situations. It was more than I'd ever imagined when I first opened that violation notice. On the 2-year anniversary of that initial letter, I hosted a barbecue at my house. I invited Gerald, Sarah, Richard Norton, Thomas, and several other board members and neighbors who'd supported me throughout everything. We ate, drank, and celebrated the fact that the generator was still humming along in my backyard, still doing its job. You know what I realized? Richard said as the evening was winding down. That generator is probably the most important piece of equipment in this whole neighborhood, and most people who live here don't even know it exists. I'm okay with that, I said. I'd rather it just do its job quietly without any more drama. Fat chance of that, Sarah laughed. You're the guy who took on an HOA and won, then got a law passed. You're basically a local legend now. I just wanted to keep a generator, I protested, and ended up changing how HOAs operate across the entire state, Gerald added. Not a bad outcome for standing your ground. As everyone left that evening, I found myself alone on my deck again, looking at the generator in the fading light. It had been 2 years of stress, conflict, legal battles, and uncertainty. But it had also brought unexpected friendships, meaningful change, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd done the right thing even when it was difficult. The generator would keep running, keep providing that crucial backup to the hospital's surgical wing. And now, it would be protected by law from anyone who tried to force its removal. Linda Fairchild had tried to wield her HOA authority like a weapon, and instead, she'd ended up catalyzing reform that would prevent others from doing the same. I thought about all the people that generator might save in the years to come, people who would never know that their life had been protected by a neighborhood dispute that escalated into something much bigger. That felt right somehow. The best kind of heroism was the invisible kind, the infrastructure and systems that worked so well that no one had to think about them. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Patient in or 4 tonight. Minor complication. Power flickered. Relay system handled it perfectly. Another save. Thank you again. I smiled and typed back, just doing my part. And that was true. I hadn't set out to be a crusader or a local hero or someone who got laws changed. I just refused to remove a piece of equipment that served an important purpose. Everything else had flowed from that one decision to stand firm. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose. They're the ones that choose us, and we just have to decide whether we're going to fight or fold. I'd chosen to fight, and while it hadn't been easy, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The generator hummed on into the night, a steady mechanical heartbeat that connected my property to the hospital down the street, ready for the next time it would be needed. And I sat on my deck, finally at peace with everything that had happened, knowing that sometimes defending what's right means standing up to people who can't see beyond their own petty concerns. In the end, that was the real victory, not just keeping the generator but proving that community standards should serve the community's actual needs, not just its aesthetic preferences. Linda Fairchild had learned that lesson the hard way, and now it was written into state law for everyone else. As I headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the generator. Tomorrow it would still be there, still doing its job, still protecting people who would never know its story. And that was exactly how it should be.